Section: Introduction. In this section, we explore large-scale text-to-image generative models that can create realistic images by combining different elements in new ways. However, the understanding of how these models achieve this, as well as their limitations, has not been thoroughly examined, especially in large diffusion models due to their complexity and the vast amount of data they use. Previous research has looked into factorization and compositional generalization in various deep generative models, but there is still no clear agreement on whether the representations learned in the model's intermediate layers help improve compositional generalization. Some studies found little connection between factorization and compositionality, while others argued that factorization aids compositionality. This lack of consensus is partly because earlier studies used complex datasets that mixed different types of features, making it hard to analyze the learned representations in detail. Despite the impressive compositional skills of diffusion-based text-to-image models, there has been limited direct investigation into their factorization and compositional generalization. A recent study by Okawa and colleagues showed that diffusion models can learn to generalize compositionally, but they did not delve into the mechanisms behind this or analyze the representations the models learned. To better understand factorization and compositionality in diffusion models, we conduct extensive experiments using conditional denoising diffusion probabilistic models trained on various 2D Gaussian datasets. We draw inspiration from cognitive psychology and neuroscience, designing simple tasks for the models while examining both their generated outputs and the representations in their intermediate layers. We specifically assess the model's ability to generalize by generating 2D Gaussian bumps at specified coordinates on a canvas. By using a low-dimensional dataset and a straightforward experimental setup, we aim to clearly analyze how the model's representation factorization relates to its generalization abilities. We consider a dataset made up of multiple independent one-dimensional features. A model might learn a combined representation of all dimensions or learn independent representations for each feature. If the model learns a combined representation, it would need to see a large number of samples during training. However, if it recognizes the independence of the features, it could learn with far fewer samples. We refer to the first scenario as a coupled representation and the second as a factorized representation, which is generally more efficient and adaptable for further applications. In biological systems, independent features are often represented in a factorized way. For example, primates use different cells to encode location and orientation. Through 3 related studies, we investigate how diffusion models learn to represent independent features, how this affects their ability to generalize beyond the training data, and how variations in the training data influence this generalization. We define compositionality as the ability to create new combinations of features not seen during training, while interpolation refers to the ability to smoothly combine different feature values. If a model fails to perform the tasks we set, it may struggle with composition, interpolation, or both. We train the model on 2D Gaussian data and sometimes include one-dimensional Gaussian stripes that can be combined to create the desired output. We ask several key questions. Do diffusion models learn factorized representations? When do these representations develop during training? Can the models generalize beyond their training data, and what type of training data is necessary for this? Does including a few explicitly factorized examples improve efficiency and generalization? Our findings from 3 experiments reveal that 1. Given factorized inputs, diffusion models learn highly factorized representations that are distinct for both independent features and different values of the same feature. 2. While the models excel at composition, they struggle with interpolation. 3. The models can generalize compositionally when they have seen the full range of each independent feature along with a few compositional examples. 4. Models trained on datasets with isolated factors of variation need very few compositional examples to generalize, demonstrating impressive data efficiency. We conclude that diffusion models can learn factorized representations of continuous features with independent variations, showing strong compositionality but limited interpolation ability, even with adequate training. Our analysis provides valuable insights into the mechanisms of factorization and compositionality in diffusion models, suggesting that training with isolated factors and few compositional examples could lead to more efficient training methods. Section Summary. In this section, we explore how large-scale text-to-image diffusion models learn factorized representations and their ability to generalize compositionally. Our experiments reveal that these models can achieve high compositionality with limited training data, although they struggle with interpolation, highlighting the potential for more efficient training methods. Section: Methods. In this section, we describe our methods and dataset. We create grayscale images that are n by n pixels, typically setting n to 32. Each image features either a 2D Gaussian bump, which is a combination of vertical and horizontal Gaussian stripes, or a sum of stripes, which is the addition of these stripes, placed at various x and y locations. The brightness of a pixel at position x, y, for a Gaussian bump centered at mu_x, mu_y, with standard deviations sigma_x and sigma_y is calculated using a specific formula. For the sum of stripes, we use a different formula, ensuring the brightness values range from 0 to 255. Each image comes with a ground truth label indicating the center location, which varies within the range from 0 to n squared. We label the top left corner of the image as 1, 1, and the bottom right as n, n. We generate a dataset by systematically placing Gaussians across the n by n canvas, adjusting the increments in the x and y directions. Larger increments lead to fewer images, while smaller increments result in more images. Each Gaussian can spread independently in the x and y directions, affecting how much they overlap. By tuning these parameters, we can create datasets with different levels of sparsity and overlap. Most of our experiments fix the spread to 1.0 and the increments to 0.1, resulting in a default dataset of 102,400 images. For our models, we train a conditional diffusion model using a standard U-Net architecture. Each training image is paired with its ground truth label. We analyze the internal representation learned by the model, particularly focusing on the output of a specific layer. Since our dataset has two latent dimensions, we use dimension reduction techniques like PCA or UMAP to visualize the model's internal representation in 2D or 3D. We evaluate the model's performance based on how accurately it generates images that reflect the center location of the Gaussian. Next, we explore whether the model learns a coupled or factorized representation. We modify the dataset by applying periodic boundary conditions, creating a toroidal structure. A torus is formed by the Cartesian product of two circles. We compare the learned representation with the expected features of a standard torus and a Clifford torus, which is a specific type of factorized representation. By analyzing the topological features of the learned representation, we confirm that the model indeed learns a toroidal structure. We also track the emergence of this toroidal representation during training, measuring the model's accuracy and the effective dimension of its learned representations. As training progresses, we observe an initial increase in dimensionality, followed by a decrease, stabilizing around 7 dimensions. This suggests that while the model's representation is more complex than a simple 4-dimensional torus, the top 4 eigenvectors become more prominent, indicating a tendency towards a 4-dimensional representation. To further investigate, we conduct orthogonality and parallelism tests to determine if the model learns a Clifford torus. We analyze the relationships between different subspaces corresponding to the x and y dimensions. Our results show that the model encodes x and y independently in mostly orthogonal subspaces, resembling a Clifford torus. However, the model's representation does not fully match the expected characteristics of either a 3D or Clifford torus, indicating that it treats the factors of variation more like categorical variables with some overlap rather than fully continuous variables. This explains why the effective dimension of the learned representation exceeds 4 after training. We anticipate similar encoding patterns across all variations of our Gaussian bump datasets. Section Summary. In this section, we describe our method for generating n times n pixel grayscale images containing various 2D Gaussian structures, which serve as the training dataset for our conditional DDPM model. We analyze the learned representations to determine whether they exhibit a factorized or coupled structure, ultimately finding that the model learns a hyperfactorized representation, treating the independent features of variation as categorical rather than fully continuous. Section: Models can compose but not interpolate. In this section, we explore the model's ability to generalize through composition. We train the model using incomplete datasets of 2D Gaussian shapes, specifically leaving out all shapes centered in the designated test areas. We then evaluate how well the model generates 2D Gaussian shapes both within and outside these test areas. We set the width of the cuts to about 6 pixels, which aligns with the width of the Gaussian stripes. Our goal is to test the model's compositional generalization and its ability to interpolate spatially in one variable. We identify 4 possible outcomes based on the model's performance. 1. If the model cannot compose or interpolate, we expect low performance across the test areas. 2. If it can interpolate but not compose, we would see high performance in the test areas. 3. If it can compose but not interpolate, we would observe high performance in one dimension but low in the other, particularly in the overlapping test area. 4. If it can both compose and interpolate, we would see high performance across all test areas. We note that cases 2 and 4 would appear similar in the model's behavior. In our first experiment, we trained the model on a dataset of 2D Gaussian shapes, excluding all data centered in the test areas. We refer to this as the 2D model. We then check the model's accuracy in generating shapes at the correct positions in various test areas, which we divide into horizontal, vertical, and their intersection. Our findings show that the 2D model performs well in generating one variable while struggling with the other in the respective sections, and it has low accuracy in the intersection area. This suggests that the model can generate one variable independently of the other, indicating it is compositional but has limited interpolation ability. This aligns with our expectation for outcome 3, confirming that the model has learned to separate the two variables but not to represent them consistently across all values. To further test our hypothesis, we create a new dataset that combines 2D Gaussian shapes with 1D Gaussian stripes. We generate 1D data across the entire range of both variables without any exclusions. When we combine this with the previous dataset, we find that the new model, which we call the 2D plus 1D model, performs well in generating both variables across all test areas. This indicates that with the right components, the model can effectively compose them into 2D shapes. Next, we investigate whether the model can learn compositionality without any compositional examples in the training data. We train a 1D model on the 1D Gaussian stripe dataset and find that while it generates one variable accurately, it fails to generate the other, showing it did not learn to compose the stripes properly. This reinforces our conclusion that compositional examples are necessary for effective generalization. We also examine whether combining the 2D Gaussian shapes with 1D stripes can lead to a different type of compositionality. We create a dataset with 2D Gaussian bumps instead of shapes and find that the model can generate these bumps with good accuracy, suggesting it can handle a different compositional structure. We further analyze how the number of examples affects performance and find that even with fewer examples, the model maintains similar performance. Finally, we compare the efficiency of models trained on the combined datasets versus those trained only on 2D shapes. Our results show that the models trained on the combined datasets require fewer examples to achieve a certain accuracy level, indicating that using a full range of data along with a few compositional examples leads to more efficient training. In summary, our findings indicate that while the model excels at compositionality, it struggles with interpolation. Effective generalization requires a comprehensive training set that includes all variations and compositional examples. We also find that models trained on datasets with clear factorization show improved data efficiency and adaptability, suggesting strategies for developing more efficient training methods. Section Summary. In this section, we investigate the model's compositional generalization by training it on incomplete datasets of 2D Gaussian sauce and assessing its performance in generating Gaussian sauce in various test regions. Our findings reveal that while the model can effectively compose independent features, it struggles with interpolation, indicating that successful generalization requires a comprehensive training set that includes a full range of individual factors and some compositional examples. Section: Connection between manifold learning and percolation theory. In this section, we explore the link between manifold learning in diffusion models and percolation theory from physics, which helps explain how factorization or compositional generalization occurs. We observe that our Gaussian bump datasets can be modeled as a Poisson-Boolean model, a common system in percolation theory. We illustrate our dataset of Gaussian bumps as disks of different sizes on a two-dimensional grid. In percolation theory, we focus on the critical fraction of nodes that must overlap for the entire system to be connected. Typically, there is a phase transition at this critical fraction, which can be calculated or estimated, and this transition sharpens as the system size increases. Since our Gaussian bump images are pixelated, the overlaps between neighboring bumps are not smooth. We plot the normalized measure of overlap for bumps separated by a certain distance, noting that overlaps can exceed 1 due to the discrete nature of the data. We propose that if there isn't enough training data, the diffusion model struggles to accurately represent the dataset. From a percolation viewpoint, without a sufficiently large interconnected component, the model cannot learn the spatial relationships among data points, hindering its ability to create a faithful two-dimensional representation. To test this idea, we simulate the size of the largest interconnected components based on the density of our Gaussian bump datasets. We use a dataset of 1024 points on a grid and randomly sample points to determine the size of the largest interconnected cluster. We define a threshold for overlap to consider two bumps as overlapping. Our simulation results, averaged over multiple runs, show how the size of the largest cluster varies with different overlap thresholds. Next, we quantify the relationship between percolation theory and manifold formation in diffusion models. To minimize randomness in our dataset sampling, we select a fixed set of points and generate datasets with varying spreads. Each sampled dataset is a superset of the smaller ones, ensuring that differences in training arise solely from the spread and density parameters. To maintain fairness in our comparisons, we adjust the training time for models trained on smaller datasets so that the total training batches remain constant. Our results indicate significant variability in model performance, particularly for certain spreads, due to both the stochastic nature of training and the gradual phase transition observed in our simulations. We find that a very small spread does not create any connected clusters, yet our experiments show that the model can still learn from such datasets at higher densities. This is partly because the noise in the diffusion training process effectively broadens the bumps. Overall, our findings align with percolation theory, suggesting that smaller similarities between samples make it more challenging for models to learn meaningful representations, even with the same amount of data. Section Summary. In this section, we explore the connection between manifold learning in diffusion models and percolation theory, demonstrating that the ability of the model to learn effective representations is influenced by the interconnectedness of the dataset, as characterized by the critical fraction of overlapping nodes. Our simulations reveal that insufficient overlap among Gaussian bumps hinders the model's capacity to accurately represent the data, aligning with predictions from percolation theory. Section: Discussion. In this section, we have demonstrated that diffusion models can learn representations that are both factorized and semi-continuous. This capability enables compositional generalization across factors present in the training data, even with a limited number of compositional examples. Although we examined a simplified system, our findings suggest that the architecture of diffusion models has inherent biases that support factorization and compositionality, as illustrated by impressive examples like an astronaut riding a horse on the moon. Our results further indicate that when the training data includes distinct factors that vary independently along with some compositional examples, diffusion models can achieve strong performance in out-of-distribution compositional generalization. While natural images are indeed more complex and can exhibit various forms of compositionality, the datasets and compositions we analyzed were not trivial. However, we recognize the need for more research to fully understand how models handle multiple forms of compositionality. Additionally, we established a link between the model's performance, specifically their ability to accurately represent the dataset, and concepts from percolation theory in physics. This theory offers a reasonable explanation for the sudden increase in the model's capabilities once a certain number of data points is reached. We believe further exploration is required to clarify the relationship between percolation theory and the formation of manifolds in both simplified and real-world scenarios. In realistic datasets, we can use mutual information or cosine similarity between data points as abstract indicators of overlap. Furthermore, the concept of percolation can be expanded to investigate other observations of phase transitions in deep learning, such as the flow of knowledge in large language models.